The following program was made possible thanks to the generous support of our Kickstarter backers.
When first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired.
Sup, Holmes?
Beware your host, Jonathan Holmes.
Thank you so much, Sinistar. Sinistar, you would fit in perfectly, actually, with the game that today's guest, Tom, who's making Axiom Verge. Tom, how do I pronounce your last name?
It's Happ.
Happ?
Like happy, no why.
Good to know. Tom Happ. To it.
Hmm?
Oh, Sinistar, you're so smooth. Did you know? Okay. Are you still there, Tom?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm not hearing Sinistar if he's talking.
Okay. A lot of things happened in my computer world just now. So we're going to get the flow back to the show right now and ask you, Tom, how was E3? You just got back.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I assumed it would be overwhelming, and it was completely off the hook insane.
And you live in Las Vegas.
I do. I mean, I kind of, live in a desert nearby Las Vegas, but
Sure.
Las Vegas is the mailing address, yeah.
So you're accustomed to glitz, glamour, marketing, flash, attention-getting, show-stopping stuff. That's what Las Vegas is all about. And you went to E3, and then what happened?
Yeah, so E3 is, well, of course I have my own kiosk there, so I'm sort of stuck at that kiosk, but there is a giant screen right behind me, just constantly blaring, all the various AAA games, lots of squishing sounds of people having their limbs dismembered, and explosions and things like that. It eventually just becomes background noise. Like white noise. You could
Sound almost like
if you went through it enough.
Yeah. Sounds similar to what I've heard from soldiers coming back with not quite PTSD yet, but this kind of stage of overstimulation of the mess of what they were around. Of course, that is a very serious, traumatic thing to have suffered from, and being around loud video games is different. But a similar thing where it just turns into white noise, or like living next to the airport, or living next to a screaming friend who's just always making things loud for you. Did you enjoy being around the big money side of video games for the first time, maybe?
Yeah, it was the first time. Typically my whole knowledge base of E3 just has come from being a gamer and reading whatever journalists write about E3, occasionally watching a live stream or something along those lines. Actually being there in person as an exhibitor, I would say it's like another level
of awesome?
I don't know if the word is awesome. I'm still kind of, shell-shocked. I think like a fog of wars settled around me, and I'm just kind of, trying to process everything. But it clearly was a good thing. I got some good press. I got some awards, and I got some, to make some connections, meet some people I'd only heretofore only known via Twitter and the like. So that was
sure. It is many different things at once. I think that assessing E3 is kind of like assessing an entire season of a show like the X-Files or something, or maybe the X-Files in its entirety. I don't know if you've watched a lot of X-Files. Pretty neat show.
Yeah, I did partake of the X-Files for me.
Wonderful to hear. So we have common ground to stand on there. When the X-Files is at its best, it makes you feel so connected, makes you feel like you've stumbled upon this wonderful, unique, very well-crafted, cared-about thing. And when it's at its worst, it's just like selling you the T-1000 in a hotel room having a wrinkled, boring conversation about aliens, maybe. You're like, you thought I wanted this, you son of a bee? Where's the good X-Files? Where's Mulder at? E3, very similar for me, having to wander around the entire show. It's so many things, it's hard to whittle it down into just one, and you're constantly seeking that great E3 moment that may not happen. This is the first year I haven't been, I think, and I think I went the past 5 or 6 years, and it was actually a relief to just sit back at home and watch only things I was interested in and not be bombarded with information all the time, bombarded with a culture all the time, which sometimes is disgusting and poisonous, and sometimes is beautiful and awesome. So it's definitely easier to stay home, though it's not as intense. Sounds like your time was pretty intense overall.
Yeah, I would say, because I think as basically an unknown entity, there was a sort of progression during which people would come by and be like, oh, what's this Axiom Verge? And then GameSpot or someone like writes about it or talks about it, and suddenly there's more people coming, and then you're meeting some bigwig that you only previously had seen on television, and
Whoa. Conan O'Brien?
No.
Could have.
But for bigwig for me, for my game nerd self, I think of like Reggie as a bigwig, or John Blow, or someone. When you see them, you're just like, that's really them, the person that I watched in that movie that I downloaded from, iTunes.
And they were. Did you meet either of them, Reggie or Jonathan Blow?
I did, like, very briefly. John Blow was at a Sony development dinner that we had, and Reggie just came by to say, that looks like Metroid, and then immediately got heckled by, there was a journalist nearby who was just like, well, if you're not going to make it, someone has to. So, I was just kind of, I had no words at that moment because I was, I guess, a bit starstruck, but... and then it was over. And then it was back to like trying to recover and like demo the game to people and pretend like it was the same as before. So,
sure. And did Sony send you out? Did they help pay for you to be there?
Yeah, they did. So Sony's got this great program for independent developers called the Pub Fund, and I guess even some developers that are just registered, Sony developers that are not Pub Fund were also there, and they basically do co-marketing with you. So they had set up the E3 kiosk for me, and were playing my trailer, up there occasionally next to all the AAA games, and it was pretty. That aspect is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I'd imagine. So very much a mixed bag from the sound of it. You get to suddenly have made it in this way. Not that you haven't made it before, but it's a new level for you to be at the same dinner as multi-million-dollar developers, famous developers, and to be talking to huge publishers. But on the other end, I'd imagine there's a ton of pressure that this is maybe the biggest moment in marketing for Axiom Verge. Period. Maybe it'll get bigger from here, but up until now, it's about as big as it's gotten. So you've got to deliver, and so you're on Sony's dime, and you want to. A mix of pressure and excitement. It sounds like.
Yeah, and for the pressure side of things, it's very palpable. Just because I didn't go into it thinking I would get that much attention. The Axiom Verge was a game that started as a hobby project, and even when the first time I had been trying to get Sony to sign me up for the Pub Fund, and when they finally said, like, you've made it, you're in, we want to support you, and show you at E3, that was like a stage of disbelief for me, and it kept on continuing. Like there were multiple levels of absurdity for me because it seemed you just have this feeling that, well, I'm the only one who really plays this game, so I don't know how good it is, but people keep on telling me, like, this is really good, like, we really like this, and we think it's, up there with Destiny, not the metaphorical sense, but the game.
Sure, the video game, yeah. That
Yeah,
it deserves the same level, and I would agree with those people. Not that I haven't played Axiom Verge yet, but I've been following it off and on since, I think my first email to you was like 2002. No, 12, I'm sorry. Mix up my 2 years.
Yeah.
I think it was 2012. It caught my eye right away because, in part, I think a lot of people, I know that I am hungry for a game like that. I think a lot of people are. As the heckler said to Reggie, if you don't make the new Metroid, someone else will. And though there's been some games that have been in the Metroid, I don't want to say genre, but definitely given off similar feeling as that, offered a similar experience. Axiom Verge, from what I know, is one of the only ones that's really shooting right at a lot of the things that made the very first Metroid special, at least to me. It gives you that sense of being in both a world of video game graphics and a real alien world that is ever-changing and unpredictable and disturbing and curiosity-inducing at the same time. That's how I felt about Metroid anyway, and that's how I felt about everything I've seen about your game. Is that what you were going for?
I'd say so, yes. In particular, when you say the first Metroid, I think for a lot of people Metroid began with Super Metroid, but for me, I think my fondest memories would have to be of the original Metroid. I don't know if that's just because the age I was at, I was so impressionable, or what. But yeah.
I am with you on that. I don't know how old you are. How old are you, Tom?
I'm 37.
I'm also 37. So it could be an
cool.
age thing. Could be that we're just cursed. The 37 curse is to love the first Metroid a lot. I love all the Metroid games. Super Metroid is probably the one that I have the most varied feelings for and the overall respect for. But the first Metroid, if I had to take just one with me somewhere and never play another Metroid again, it might be the first one, because for me, that's the one that gives the most intense levels of the things you only get in the Metroid series, or the things that at least define the Metroid series for me, which is like, you're in an alien world, we're gonna defy your expectations on purpose to throw you off. You think you're supposed to run right in order to get through this? You were actually supposed to run left and find a ball that we won't explain to you what it does, and if you happen to press down, you'll find out that you turned into a ball, and not explain it to you, and just like try not to die, figure it out. With so many hidden walls, so many hidden areas, so many intentional tricks and traps to make you feel like you're in a world that is truly hostile, yet still very curiosity-inducing. Super Metroid did that as well, but they kind of toned it down to warm it up for people, so it's a little bit less alien, a little bit less uninviting. That first one, geez, they didn't care if you ever beat that. They were ready for you to just fail and give up forever, but that made it all the more exciting when you did. So I don't know, that puts you in a spot. If that's one of your favorite Metroid games, and if it's one of your favorite games for similar reasons, do you want to make Axiom Verge the kind of game that isn't necessarily inviting, that feels truly organic and alien, and not trying to give anything to the player, to make the player feel, like it's hostile, like the player is screwed over by playing it? Or do you want to make it more inviting?
I think it's kind of a mix, because gaming culture has changed so much that to give a new player that same feeling that you and I had as kids, it's going to take something different, and you have to always bear that in mind. That what used to seem, perfectly commonplace, to bomb every single wall you saw, hoping that it could be a secret passageway, because you had no other, there were no gold glowing barriers to tell you this is the bomb area, or a little pop-up box doesn't come up or didn't come up back then.
Sure.
It's sort of like you have to find out what is the analogous thing for today's world that can give that same feeling that we had, but also not make people give up in complete frustration. I have a feeling that if I were to somehow play Metroid with fresh eyes, never having played it today, I'd probably, I'd give up. There's no map to this thing. I have to draw it. So you have to look at it through a kind of lens and
sure,
almost like extrapolate a bit to the present day.
Yeah,
Figure out where that would fit in.
Right. And knowing that the language of games like Metroid is kind of a known language. And if you speak that exact same language, people are going to catch on to it a little bit too quickly. So you have to come up with a new language, a new design language that makes them feel the same way they did the first time they heard that language. That's no easy feat. Geez, I'm scared just thinking about it. How long have you been working on the game for?
About 4.5 years.
Wow. Pretty intense. How close would you say you are? Not that it's an easy thing to answer, but if you had to guess, how close would you say you are to being finished with it?
Since I've started working on it full time since February or so, and I made myself a schedule. I'm pretty much on track to finish it around November or December.
Awesome.
But those are a couple of terrible months to try and release an independent game in. So what I'm likely to do is hold off, polish it for a little bit, and then release it in February or March.
Sure.
When it's more of a people are they finished playing Call of Duty, or I don't know what else is coming out this holiday season. And
PS4 and Vita. I'm not sure actually. Vita, from what I can tell, you can release a game like Axiom Verge pretty much any time, and the Vita audience is ready to eat it up because, for the most part, if you bought a Vita and have kept your Vita, it's because you want to play games like Axiom Verge. Vita being the home to such games as Spelunky, Luftrausers, I believe Hotline Miami's on there, 1001 Spikes is on there now. That's not just about everything, but it's games that are in that same kind of challenging, but in a new way, giving you a breath of fresh air on how to just really be murdered and scared by a video game. So hopefully it'll work year-round on that console, though. Though I hear 100% on the PS4 one, it's definitely best to get the holiday audience after they've eaten up whatever title they bought along with their console for Christmas and are looking for something fresh to spring right at that point. So, good plan. We should get into, because I'd like to know how you got started in game development and what inspired you to make a game like Axiom Verge other than Metroid, which we already talked a little bit about. So how did you get into this field?
Since ancient times, basically since my college years, I knew I wanted to be in game development. And I worked at a few small studios, one of which was eventually purchased by Electronic Arts. So I worked at Tiburon for a while as an animator on NFL Street, and there's Arena Football. Then I was working on Tiger Woods, and then I eventually left them for Las Vegas to go work for Petroglyph, and then I was an engineer working on the ill-fated End of Nations, the upcoming Grey Goo, various games in between like Rise of Immortals and very smaller games Petroglyph released in the meantime.
Interesting. So you've worked on both the engineering side and the animation side?
That's correct.
How about the design side in terms of having the idea for how the game will play, the general premise, and getting to shoot that out? Was that something you ever did? Yeah?
It's not. It's not really. Yeah, I'm more of, what I think of as like a leaf node. I'll generally engineering or animation, depending on where I happen to be. But yeah, the design is. I've never figured out how you break into that in this industry. I think, yeah, it's.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that, because you clearly, you designed a game that Sony thought was worth showing on the big screen. You are an accomplished game designer. However, to do it for larger, and it's a very good question. Just about everybody I know in the industry, they'll work under a Ken Levine, or they'll work under Shigeru Miyamoto, or what have you. And I'll be like, how do you become them at this point? And they're like, we have no idea. I don't know if they get picked out of a hat, and it's just like you just make up all the games now, or what. Like, to climb that ladder and to reach that point, just about everybody I know in the AAA industry doesn't know how they would ever get to the top. They feel like they're kind of permanently stuck at the bottom, or very best in the middle. So is that how it was for you too, witnessing how those things were run?
To some extent, I guess it felt like being stuck, but on the other hand, the nature of AAA was such that I didn't necessarily envy the people at the top, because the way I looked at it was, what would be the most enjoyable thing to do? And when you think about it in those terms, having lots of meetings and conferences and writing spreadsheets and documents, none of those are fun. It sounds like it would be fun, but really, ultimately, I found for myself programming, of the things you can do in AAA, I thought programming was the most enjoyable, because you're kind of doing something creative, and it's always mentally stimulating. I shouldn't say even. I was almost going to say, like, even when you're doing database programming, that's my least favorite kind of programming.
I don't know much about the difference. What would the difference be between, let's say, gameplay programming, like programming how an object interacts with another object, versus database programming?
My personal experience with database programming has been that it's a very you need to have a very structured mindset. They have a lot of things called constraints, third normal form, indices, and when you're a database programmer, I think your daily experience is one of trying to make sure that everything maintains a certain amount of rigidity, or it's going to explode on you, from just the tension of the millions of things that are kept in that database.
It sounds like trying to plug your finger in a dam where holes are constantly breaking, and diffusing bombs at the same time, and like negotiating with terrorists.
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
And the most experience I had was on an MMO game. So if you can imagine how just absurdly complex those kinds of games are, I think it would probably be easier if it was a customer database or something like that.
Sure.
So I always felt much better when it was like, la la la, I'm doing particles, I'll make something explode, here's a new way for things to explode. It just felt like so much less pressure and more like I'm having fun.
Right, because database programming, from the way you describe it, at least for an MMO, it's like dealing with a living being and trying to keep up with how it may be changing, whereas
it's changing underneath you, yeah.
Yeah. So animation and programming, how would you say those two things are similar? I have some animation background, and it's something that a lot of people have told me I could never do that because it's so tedious, but I love it. I can sit there and do hand-drawn animation for 8 hours, not get bored. coders tell me the same thing. I know I'm scared of coding. I would feel like I would feel stupid and bored at the same time. But you seem to really enjoy it. Do you see similarities between those two art forms?
There are some similarities, I'd say, particularly if you're doing something like 3D animation or you're just using digital tools. You know, there are some organizational things that you have to consider, and animation does have its own. You know, if you're talking about things where there's kind of a set of rules that you're trying to be creative within those, and when you're animating, it's a lot like, you know, you're doing the you set a few keyframes in the walk cycle. You always make sure the pelvis is going contrary to the direction the shoulders are in, and vice versa. You're thinking about the follow-through motion, and it's on the one hand it's artistic, but on the other hand, I think it does use your left brain to a large degree. Yeah.
Sure. So it's a mix of just following the craft and making sure that the patterns are in place in the way they need to be, but also having to creatively solve problems as they pop up all of a sudden. And I think that's something that scares people away from both coding and animating. That's like, what if there was a problem I didn't know how to solve? I would just die and it would be over. They don't get to the point where it's like, no, you could. It's not easy, and you have to take some risks, and you have to be willing to explore and try things you've never tried before. But that's how you get better, is to keep trying and to talk to other people about how to solve the problem and do something that may not work, but just to see what happens. Yeah, sounds like you've got some experience with that. Is that something you've always been interested in, even pre-college? Is that something, animation, coding, something you liked even as a kid?
Kind of. I had, you know, an Etch-a-Sketch animator as a kid, but I think, I think I really didn't come into game development until I was in college, and I accidentally was enrolled in a computer programming course. I was supposed to enroll in calculus or something, and instead I learned how to program, and very shortly thereafter it occurred to me, I like video games, and programmers program video games. Maybe there's something I could do with this. And the animation connection was kind of similar. Back in those days, there was no such thing as video game degrees. You know, they didn't have the tweaking the graphics on level 3 yet. So the way I thought of how am I going to break into the game industry without being a graphics programming guru, not having been able to find anyone to teach me, I enrolled in an animation program at RIT, and so I kind of ended up learning both things, because even while I was in graduate school, I was still fascinated by what I'd learned as an undergraduate programming, and I would make like little Java games and the like, and I made a Game Boy Advance emulator at one point. And
Really?
then,
Maybe I've used it. What was it called?
it was called Cowbite, and you probably didn't use it because it was geared towards development, so I had a lot of debugging tools in it and that sort of thing, and I don't think it could play a commercial game.
Huh. Still pretty
But
cool, though. Yeah.
yeah, but what it did do was like help me get my first break, which was actually as a coder. Ironically, I was in school to learn animation, but the first job I was able to get in the industry was programming Game Boy Advance. So
interesting. You are the second guest on this new season 3 of Sup Holmes to say that. Mike Kasperzak, who runs Ludum Dare, also got his break on Game Boy, though it might have been Game Boy Color. He worked on Secret Agent Barbie on the Game Boy Advance, and it was actually kind of awesome. What was your first Game Boy Advance game?
none of them ever shipped.
Oh no!
I worked on like 4. There was a game called Quest that was like a roguelike, very similar to Diablo, if you could imagine it on Game Boy Advance.
Really?
And it was pretty technically up there. It had a 3D character on a system with no 3D graphics hardware.
Wow.
Yeah, we had a game, we worked on many games. This was at Red Eye Studios, just trying to catch a break and convince a publisher to do business with us. So we made a game that was like a side-scrolling Maximo.
Huh?
If you remember, Maximo was sort of like a 3D Ghosts and Goblins. So we went back the other way and made a 2D Maximo, just to show off at trade shows and the like.
Sure.
And another one was a pinball game that was canceled.
Oh.
It was actually going to be like a Disney associated property, and that was canceled.
Oh.
So weirdly enough, that studio was also contracting cutscenes for Vicarious Visions at the time. So the only work I did that was seen by the public was animation on the Crash Nitro Kart kart racing game for PlayStation 2 and GameCube and the like.
Sure, a lot of people said that that was better than the Mario Kart at the time. People really liked that particular Crash racing, if I remember correctly. Interesting how the kart racing thing has become its own genre. That is such a disappointment, though, especially about the Maximo game. My imagination is fully blown thinking about how awesome that could have been. I liked Maximo, but I really loved Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, and I was waiting for them to go back to 2D with that character and bring us a nice combination of the combat of Maximo, which, if I remember correctly, was a little bit more hand-to-hand than Ghosts and Goblins was, but still with that, old Ghosts and Goblins feeling that I wanted. How did that Maximo-ish game look? How do you think it turned out?
It looked very polished. We had a team of animators. Not just me. I was doing code at that time, but I think we were using pre-rendered assets. If you had ever seen any of the Crash Bandicoot Game Boy Advance games, much of the art for those games, and I think including Crash himself, was done at the same studio I was at. It was contracted out, and the Maximo was kind of that kind of graphical style, but with Maximo. And
Sure.
it wasn't sanctioned by Capcom or anything. We were just trying to get someone to notice, and we would have been happy to put in some other character besides Maximo.
Sure. Or if Capcom had said, make this Maximo game, I'd assume they would have ran with that. Capcom has had a rough time, in my opinion, over the years figuring out what game to put on handhelds versus consoles, or which handhelds to put it on. They put Resident Evil on the DS, but not on the PSP. They put Mega Man on the PSP and not on the DS. It's kind of backwards as to where their audience was. And Maximo, I think, could have done great on the Game Boy Advance. I think the Mega Man fans in particular would have wanted to jump right on a similar, they were hungry for that kind of action at that point, that kind of throwback, but at the same time giving you something new. Well, gosh darn it. Could it still happen? Do you know anyone at Red Eye? Can you tell them to do it?
That would be up to Chris Winters. He was the CEO and owner. I don't think Red Eye really exists, and I don't remember what he was doing. He last moved to, I thought, Boston. Maybe he's working for Warner Brothers.
All right. That's my neck of the woods. I'll see if I can track him down.
So everything we did there was all kind of Chris Winters' brainchild. So, So come to think of it, if only that had been today. Today there's this focus on independent games, and Red Eye Studios really was like an independent game studio. Things might have been very different.
Can you refresh my memory as to other things that Red Eye worked on after the Crash games? Because I only have a vague. I don't trust my recollection today.
Yeah. So Vicarious Visions over in Troy, New York, actually programmed the games and then contracted out Red Eye Studios for various assets. So I think they did Crash. I think they might have done a SpongeBob game. I think there was a later Crash where they did the cutscenes for it. And that was around the time that I left and went to work in New Jersey. But I think.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I should dial it back a little bit. There were some Axiom Verge questions that were popping into my head as you were going. Hopefully I can remember all of them. The first one, as it comes to mind, was if you're skilled at polygon-based animation, sounds like that you are, did you ever consider using that as opposed to the sprite-based, the more, old-school looking graphics that you have for Axiom Verge? From what I've been told by just about everybody today that I know who's working on pixel-based graphics, they get so many people complaining that pixel-based graphics are lazy, pixel-based graphics are just pandering to nostalgia. There's like a stigma around it at this point because so many people have used it. To me, it's just a style that evokes a certain feeling when you see it, and if that feeling is appropriate to the game, great, and if not, then not. But to be against it or for it based on just the fact that it is what it is, doesn't totally make sense to me. However, a lot of the people making these pixel-based games don't have the 3D modeling and animation skills that it sounds like you have. So did you ever consider changing the look of Axiom Verge so it had polygons?
I had originally begun my foray into XNA with using 3D graphics, and my original thought before I did Axiom Verge was I would try to make a 3D your 2.5D Zelda like game.
Sure.
It wasn't entirely the main character was a like a pinball, like a ball that you rolled around, and the environments were very simple. But I found that even just having very simple assets like balls, like a textured ball, and rocks in the background, things that are quote unquote easy to do, it was very time consuming to set them up and make them. And I think if you went a very stylized route like Mike Bithel's taking with his new stealth game, you might be able to get the same throughput that you could in a 2D game.
Sure.
But ultimately, my feeling was I'm going to be frustrated in how long it's taking, and there's a really strong danger in that because so many people will just give up if that happens. So
absolutely. Yeah.
I eventually started over, kind of like took some base elements from that code and just made everything sprites.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. In my experience, someone who's a one-man or two-man team, one-woman or two-woman team working on a game with polygons, if they're going to go for something like Gunman Clive, which has a very simple, kind of sweet aesthetic, it's visually, it's beautiful, but it's not going for something that's like going to inflict menace or make you feel as though you're in like a troubling world. It's very hard to like do low polygon count and troubling together. Like Minecraft can be troubling because creepers are terrifying, but it's still kind of a cute and light world when you go for low polygon count and simple graphics. Whereas pixels, sprites, at least for me, you can do something very low detail or low amount of colors on screen, but it still makes you feel like something's gonna drip on you or something's gonna eat you like any second. Like I immediately think of Lone Survivor by Jasper Byrne, did all the graphics on his own. If that had been polygons, he very likely couldn't have inflicted the same level of dread upon me with such simple characters. For some reason, there's something about sprites that just make you feel like your touch with reality is just a little bit off, and you're a little bit off balance, and maybe are in danger. At least that's how it works for me. What do you think? Do you think you could have achieved the same level of creepiness with polygons as you have with sprites?
So, say, like, throughput aside, if I was to actually, somehow I had the ability to dilate time and, spend all my time making polygonal assets, I feel like it can be done, but you probably don't want to. Another thing to be said, not just for pixel, but specifically for tile-based games.
Mm.
When your world is composed of these uniform square elements, you're getting something from that. You're actually being telegraphed that each thing has a certain behavior, and it's built into the very structure of that world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important. It's almost like in the real world where, you know, a molecule for wood is different from a molecule for metal.
Mm-hmm.
In a game that's tile-based, you know when you see the GUI tile, it's going to, all of the GUI tiles are going to be, maybe they slow you down when you walk in them, or you can shoot them and they explode. And all of the rock tiles that have a crack in them can be drilled with your drill.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be exceptions to that, but I think that's a lot different than if it's a polygon game, say like Shadow Complex,
Mm-hmm.
where you know, a wall in the room might be just a single quad, and the part that you can destroy is actually a detailed object that they made because they had to make it be able to blow up.
Mm-hmm.
And to draw your attention to it, they have to put a glowing shader on it. And the player kind of knows, like, this whole world is made up except for the glowing part.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part I can interact with.
Even though it's clear, it says to the player, "This is fake. You're looking at a bunch of polygons. You're not in a world with a consistent language. You're in a world where we are telling you that we're game designers and we needed to point out this part of the design to you, making you suddenly notice that you're playing a video game as opposed to getting really sucked into what you're doing."
Right, exactly. And the pixel worlds are almost, you know, it's an abstraction that it's like, hey, I'm in this other kind of reality now.
Mm-hmm.
It's got its own world, its own rules to it. And
I always the
I think
comparison.
once you accept that, it can be just as scary, if not more so, you know, than a multi-million-dollar AAA 3D.
Sure, absolutely, especially with the lights off. The comparison I usually do for people whom, because this sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo to a lot of people, and I can see why. When you're trying to say to someone, "Oh yeah, low-res graphics are really better in some ways, guys," or like, you're just trying to be a hipster, or you're just, you know, trying to feed me some snake oil or something. But if you look at The Simpsons, like The Simpsons has touched people intellectually, emotionally. It makes them laugh, but it also makes them think. They've gotten like a sense of attachment to this very fake-looking world with googly-eyed people with four fingers on each hand and yellow skin. It's like it doesn't look real, but it feels real because it's at least very consistent. And that consistency, once the mind gets acclimated to the language it's been immersed in, you believe it. It becomes very emotionally believable. And one of the other things, while you were talking about the advantages of pixel-based graphics, to me, when I compared, let's say, playing Mega Man 8 versus Mega Man 2, when I'm running in Mega Man 8, there's this kind of looseness. The game isn't communicating to me exactly how far I'm running and what distance my jump is exactly. It's like a ruler that's mushy. I can't exactly get a handle on exactly where everything is, which is not good for a game with a lot of precision platforming. Whereas with pixels, subconsciously, the mind is being told everything in this world is measured in blocks. And as long as you walk to the right block and press jump at the right time, you're going to make it, 80 pixels across that you need to go. So it's almost like reading Morse code. It's all very regimented and precise, and I know exactly what's going on. I love Mega Man 8. It's a beautiful looking game, but it doesn't have the same kind of feel of exactness that I get from some of the older Mega Man games. Would you say that also follows true for polygon-based platformers versus pixel-based platformers?
Yeah, definitely, and I think you almost get used to certain crutches when it comes to polygonal-based platformers. The characters often need to have a way to grab onto a ledge, because they know the player is sloppy. So the character's going to have a kind of gooey, like barrier around their body, through which, if anything intersects that gooey barrier, they can like latch on and finish the move that the player could have done in a 2D game just by looking.
Sure. It's to me, playing a good platformer is kind of like engaging in a conversation where you're, instead of talking to another person, you're talking to the game, and the game is telling you stuff, and you're saying stuff back to it with the decisions you make in the moment. And playing a lot of polygon-based platformers is like talking to a loose, kind of drunk friend who might interrupt you in the middle, like, yeah, well, actually, you should, and it's hard to get the rhythm down, it's hard to get and when you're in a conversation, you can't plan out everything you're going to do. A lot of your decisions are made on the fly, so the more information you're being given subconsciously as to how to make the most informed decision, the most wise decision, the better. Like, I've been playing a lot of 1001 Spikes from Nicholas and 8-Bit Fanatics. I could never play that if it was polygon-based. I would die constantly because so many of the decisions you quickly have to make based on just the information that was sent to you like a second ago, and that information has to be 100% clear in order for you to be able to make the right decision. Back to Axiom Verge, though. Is it going to have that kind of precision platforming, or is it going to be more walking, exploring, jumping, shooting, walking, shooting? What's going to happen in there?
I want it to be, up to the player. So it's kind of interesting the way I went about it. I wanted to have a lot of weapons, not because I like shooting things so much as that I wanted there to be things for you to find. Because I like exploring, and I like that's one of the key things that I like about Metroid is you explore and you find new upgrades, but usually you find just the same expansion for your missiles or energy, and it's really just like finding the same item over and over. So I thought, well, how about I make each thing different? I can have there be a whole bunch of different weapons that are interchangeable, and players can find them and use whichever weapon is their favorite. So once I made that decision, then I kind of, in order to make the weapons have a purpose, you need to have there be lots of combat. So I've kind of gone about it where I'm trying to put in alternate means of bypassing scenarios. Not quite like Deus Ex, but where there's rewards for the person who explores and tries using their items, to where maybe they don't have to go through the toughest encounter of the monsters that are going to jump on you and leech your energy or whatever.
Sure. So smarter, not harder, necessarily when you're playing.
Yeah.
And with the guns, did you say they're interchangeable in that you collect them all in the Super Metroid style, or is it more in the original Metroid style where you have to swap out? You have to choose between Wave Beam and Ice Beam. One.
You collect them, and there's an item screen where you choose which one you're currently using. And it's a little bit like Dead Space, for example, where each weapon, you can pick any of the weapons and probably get by with it, but each weapon might be good, better in a different circumstance.
Sure. Yeah, Caro Blaster did that most recently. I thought they did that pretty effectively. By the Cave Story guy, who worked on Cave Story for 5 years, about two. So you have that in common with him. Another thing about Axiom Verge that I think you announced a little bit later, the first thing that really caught my eye about the game was just the art direction. Putting so many, they're reminiscent of things you see in real life, but still alien. Like when I think of Axiom Verge, I immediately think of like a beautiful bald head. That's not like my beautiful bald head. It's somehow not quite human feeling at the same time. But later on, you announced something along the lines of somehow altering the code. It seems, the more I've talked to you, that the game combines animation and art, which is one of your skills, with your other skill and passion, which is coding, because you can kind of Well, tell us more about that. There's an element of the game that's kind of like coding, right?
I wouldn't say coding so much as glitching.
Glitching.
And so you know, you said that I didn't announce that until later, and that's true. I think I didn't ever, you know, make any mention of that on my website until I had already had a trailer out for a year or so. And the reason was I was trying to very specifically present the game, and it's like this in the game itself, to present the game in its normal, you know, Metroid, Bionic Commando, Contra hybrid game form, as a game that you can just play and finish. But I also felt there was something very special about the feeling you get when you're playing a game that's a known quantity that maybe you've played numerous times, but then you find a place where you can go through the wall, say, for example, in Super Mario Brothers, where you go through it's like stage 1, 2 or something, you can go through a wall and enter the Minus World. Or in the original Metroid itself, where you can kind of jump upward through the doors and end up in crazy, glitched out areas that are just they were never intended for you to find by the programmers. They're just, you know, a consequence of how the game programming tries to interpret the random ROM data at that location in the map.
Sure.
And I feel like that kind of boundary breaking gives the games this extra magical, anything can happen now sort of feeling. And I wanted to present the game as this is a normal game. You can play through, shoot everything, explore, whatever. And then on top of that, there might be something beyond, like something that isn't just planned for by this developer, but is actually, you know, kind of randomized, secret, mysterious. Yeah.
This is long before Frog Fractions, great game, gave people that feeling. Long before Fjords. I don't know if you've played Fjords, lesser-known game by Kyle Ryman-Garden. Very fun little game. I should send it along to you. I'm sure Kyle would. You had this idea years and years ago. What inspired you to take that kind of risk with your game, to kind of willingly break the fourth wall and say to the player, I'm acknowledging that this is a video game and you're going to be able to break my game a little bit, and I'm not going to let you know whether I knew you would do this or whether you really broke it.
It was kind of an evolution. I've been working on the game for about a year when I finally realized that I wanted to do that. And much of it had to do with, I think, the fiction of the game. I have a kind of interest in the notion of the universe as a Turing machine, and you know, the underlying fabric of space as cellular automata. And so the fiction of the game kind of deals with that, like, you know, is the character in the real world or is he not? And I'm not going to tell you the answer because I don't really know. But
so by the real world, you mean, is this a world into itself that you're entering? When you play Axiom Verge, you are in an alien world that is a stable, consistent world, or is he actually in a video game? And does he know if he's in a video game? Is that what's happening there?
There isn't any element where he's like, oh, I'm in a video game. This is really a video game I'm in. Oh, I'm not such a fan of that kind of thing, but it's more like, is our world that we're in a video game? And it is to a large degree. There is lots of evidence that, you know, we're in something like a simulation, or maybe more accurately, that simulations are like our universe.
Huh.
In that it's built up out of these discrete sets of rules that are just sort of autonomously followed. And once I was bringing that into Axiom Verge's storyline, which is, it's kind of a very long, complex, weird story, I started to realize, I'm making this game where there's this theme of computability to it, and it looks like one of my favorite games of all time, Metroid. And one of my favorite things about Metroid was glitches, or like entering passwords on that password screen, or breaking out the Game Genie and seeing what that could do. And I realized that, this fits in perfectly with the whole storyline. Then it was, no question, I added it to my design doc. Like, this is what the game world is now. So
Still a pretty big, it's a pretty big risk, and a risk I'm excited that you're taking. People are so attached to consistency and rules that, that feel fixed because it gives a sense of realness, kind of like what we were talking about before with pixel-based graphics. They're so consistent. There's nothing mushy about them, as you were saying about polygons, so it makes people feel kind of safe and like they're getting a clear bit of information. As soon as you start to break the rules a little bit, it makes people wonder, like, is this real? Is this something that I can trust? But that's real life, isn't it? Like quantum physics. Sorry, guys, turns out maybe particles exist in two places at once. Maybe teleportation is happening right now. Einstein figured out that maybe you think time is passing the way that it appears to, but maybe it's not. And if you traveled past the speed of light, maybe time would, I believe, I'm no scientist, so you'll have to catch me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff. If you were to travel at the speed of light and come back, you might not have aged very much, and everyone around you would have been dead. You would have glitched time, glitched reality. So glitches are real, and you might as well put them in your video games, because expressing what it's like to find the glitches in life is something that a lot of developers, I feel like, have done, especially since The Matrix. I can't help but feel like The Matrix influenced a lot of people, but not in a way that's as brave as actually turning it into a game that looks glitched. There'll be little pieces, like there's glitch graphics in Super Meat Boy when you find the wormholes to go to a secret level, and Braid is kind of about how you can play with the physics of a game and also the time flow of a game, kind of glitching it. But you're just explicitly showing a glitch in your game, is that right?
That's correct.
I'm so curious about how that's going to manifest itself. Though I don't want you to tell me, because I bet part of your plan is to pace how exactly it happens before me so it expresses something in the way it's paced. So if I know ahead of time, it might wreck it. I guess they call that a spoiler. You don't want to wreck the pacing. Boy, am I curious, though. Do you jump through a door and, like, you make the door close on you so you go up into the black space and then run around on O's and 1s, A's and Z's?
I'd say you're on the right track. There's no running on the 1s and 0s, but
no. When you enter something extra, something different. And is it something that's going to be spelled out to the player, like Fez, I guess, did it too, now that I think about it. Fez was about turning the world on its head a little bit and saying, like, this is a world of code and you can change the way you look at the code. Is it going to be like that, where it's kind of the premise of the game that's shown to you explicitly, or is it something people could play through the game and not even see?
At a certain point, you get a glitch ray. So that is in your face that you have this, and it's not called that, but both you and the character are watching things be glitched.
Right.
So there's varying levels, so that, in a way you can think of that as simply a tool. It might be just like the grappling hook, another thing to help you surmount obstacles. But if you really get into it, there are different levels to just how meta the experience will be.
Huh, interesting. So it's handed to you like a regular tool. It's given off like, you're not necessarily going to know that there's a lot special that can be done with this thing, but if you're willing to dig into it, you can find it. It sounds. Reminds me of Portal a little bit as well. I don't know if that was an influence. Do you want to name off some of the games that might have influenced you, other than Metroid, when it came to Axiom Verge?
Yeah, so I think I'm actually thinking of movies.
Really?
I'd say Farscape was an influence, just in the notion of this character who is, from our world entering a bizarre alien world. And when you consider the infinite possibilities there are, not just in space, but like existentially, there's just so many possible worlds, and usually the one we pick have spaceships with aliens that look like people. So I really liked the idea of just something completely far out there. Another influencer is the author Alistair Reynolds, who is he's a sci-fi author, and he writes a lot, of space operas, but they tend to be just kind of pushing the limits of what it means to be human, and what becomes normal or stomachable for the average person once technology has taken hold and it's commonplace to replace whole parts of your body with cybernetics, for example.
Was he like past Philip K. Dick, or was he before?
He's present day.
Present day.
Yeah.
With a lot of sounding like transhumanism kind of stuff. Like what's going to happen to us when we're not all what we were born with anymore?
Yeah, exactly. He deals with transhumanism. There was one book, for example, that was the main characters were all clones of each other. Basically, but they had been, due to changes in the nature of healthcare and the like, they had been alive for thousands of years, and even though they were clones, their personalities had diverged to the point where they could meet each other again, and it's like meeting a different person for them. And it was, when you read it, it feels normal. It doesn't feel like, oh, this is just bizarre, like,
Sure.
If two clones fall in love, is it incest? Like, what? It actually just felt kind of like, oh yeah, I get it. After thousands of years goes by, who cares?
Well, sure. And life changes our cellular structure, our DNA, our brains, our bodies. 7 years later, from what I'm told anyway, maybe this is just an old wives' tale or an old scientific myth, but every cell in your body after 7 years has been replaced, and you're physically no longer the same being anymore. So what would happen to a clone who had led a totally different life? Maybe started smoking cigarettes and working out, as opposed to me, who I just eat a lot of donuts on the weekends and drink too much coffee, but I don't smoke any cigarettes. Would I genetically be the same person as them 7 years later? Is there any of that in Axiom Verge? Woof. Clone gun?
There is. No, there's no swapper gun in there.
Oh, that's right.
It is a I'm not a fan of retconning, so I wrote a very long backstory to it that maybe no one will ever see, but if I delve into it, there's like many issues that come up like that. So you're going to have to play it to see, but
sure. And you said something very insightful earlier, simple but insightful, that really your biggest enemy in developing this game is your own capacity to potentially quit. It is such a scary, difficult, frustrating road potentially, and you had to make sure you cut down on your frustrations. How do you think you've managed to carry on and to continue with the project so many years later? What's caused you to not give up?
I think there's a couple of things. One is always thinking of this as a hobby, and treating it as a fun thing and not as something that I'm a failure if I don't succeed at.
Sure.
So once you do that, I think it frees you from a lot of anxiety that I've seen, I think, in other indies where their whole life is riding on it. You know, they, at the time they begin their project, they announce it and they quit their job and they're starting and they have no idea what's going to happen next.
Sure.
I think there's a lot to be said for, just trying to take it easy and enjoy it. If there's a part of it that you just can't stand, maybe like minimize those parts, how much they show up in the game.
Sure.
Do the things that you enjoy doing.
Well, by doing that, I would imagine you whittle down ideas that don't survive. It's a survival of the fittest thing with your own ideas, and the ideas that make it to the final game are probably most representative of what kind of person you are, which is, to me, the most interesting thing about video games. The bottom line of it is, when you play a game, you get an example of how that person's thinking and feeling went into what they created, and they can't help but be reflective of the person's priorities who made it, and also the rules that they think are most interesting. Like you were saying before, saying that life is maybe, like, we have simulations in life, but maybe simulations are just imitations of the life we're leading. Video games being simulations, they have a series of rules and goals, and if you set up your rules and goals in such a way where you're constantly in anxiety, like, my goal is to survive off of this video game, and the rule is I have to make it all by myself, that's like starting Mario Lost levels with like 2 lives and expecting to win. That's so stressful I couldn't even enjoy it, let alone succeed at it. So for you, setting it up and knowing that the goal is to make the game when it's done, and the rule is to try to have fun with it and be creative, but not kill yourself over it, has caused you to continue with it, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems, that, like you mentioned Pixel earlier, he spent 5 years working on his game, and I think it's much the same thing. He worked full-time somewhere else and just kind of enjoyed making it, and you can tell that when you look at it, like, what he's chosen to focus on or not focus on.
Sure. And I interviewed him over text recently, and I asked him what would happen if Sony or Nintendo were like, we want to work with you, and he said, making anything for money is impossible for me. So to have that much money and have that much responsibility, I couldn't do it. He simply couldn't. And it did take him a while. Even the responsibility after making Cave Story, he felt responsible to deliver something to his fans that was of the same caliber, and it kept him frozen for a while. He actually quit game development after Cave Story because he's like, that's as good as I can do. It took him a while to get back into it. Do you imagine something like that happening for you? Like, what if, you've already got Sony backing you, and what if Axiom Verge is a huge hit, and then Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft, what if Reggie is like, you know what, good point, you should make the new Metroid game. Here's $1 million, or here's $50 million, however much video games like that cost to make. Get a team and work it out, but it better make money or else we're going to hate you, and the Metroid fans will, put your head on a stake if you make a game that makes Samus look too, I don't know, however they want her to look. If you put her in high heels, forget it, you're fired. Whatever kind of nitpicky thing they might jump on. Would you still go for it if you have that opportunity?
No, I mean, it's...
That didn't take you long to decide.
You have to look at everything as in, am I happy with my life? Mm-hmm. Would I really be happy living the life of a person making $50 million game for Nintendo with all the pressure associated with that?
Sure.
And I think the answer would be no, but most people don't realize that. I think most people think, they just see those figures, but it's all just going to be relative. Once you have $50 million, now you're going to think of $50 million as the baseline, and you're going to be thinking, if only I had a $50 billion. You know, it doesn't really scale well. So I think you're better off just doing what makes you happy and figuring out ways you can do that thing that makes you happy as much as you can.
Sure. And for video games today, thankfully, just about everybody who is willing to put the time in can make something. If they've got, you know, a $300 computer, it's a little expensive. There is a ceiling there, certainly, but it's not such a high ceiling as it used to be, where you'd either have to get a job in the industry or you'd have to prove yourself somehow through, like, the amazing hoops you were willing to jump through to, like, create your own Game Boy Advance emulator to prove that, you know, there's a very select few that got to be involved in the industry before, and thankfully that's finally opening up. You don't need $50 million to make the next Metroid. You could make it by yourself. It just wouldn't have that kind of polish. But at the same time, I can't imagine that Metroid, a game like Metroid, would be like a AAA game today. It just was too potentially unwelcoming. It took too many interesting risks and was too likely to push people away. And the people behind the Metroid, from what I know, like, it was a small, pretty small group that put that together. That's not the kind of game you make with like 100 people knowing that 95 of them might starve if you make the wrong decisions. That's not a game made by committee, you know what I mean? It's a game only somebody like you or a small group of people like you would probably put together.
Yeah. And I think, you know, now that you mention that, I think maybe that kind of explains a lot why, you know, there's this recent interest between Sony and Microsoft to promote independent developers, and Sony has recently even started up kind of their own indie studio. It's like a San Mateo? They make the Entwined game.
Oh, wow.
It's like an indie studio within Sony, with Sony's resources, and it's, you know, I think they realize, like, yeah, like, you know, you can't start off with your first Metroid game being 50 million, because you're most likely to lose that 50 million. But if it's just a team of 10 guys, then and you're just paying their salaries, then it's totally worth it. So yeah, and I think we're living in just amazing times right now. That the things we're going to see, we now have the ability to just kind of make everything possible now and figure out what the best one is, and that's what we'll play.
Absolutely. I was to look at E3 this year and the year prior compared to when I first started going to E3, completely different world. Seeing games like yours up on the screen next to Destiny, having people say the best game they saw at Microsoft's conference was Cuphead. The game that looks like
I want to show you something. Just hold on.
Oh,
a second.
you do? Oh, good. I hope it's not indecent. Probably not. Tom seems pretty decent. Whoa!
Sorry,
Is that your awards? I meant to ask about that before. Holy crap!
This is one award. This is from GameSpot. They chose me for best of E3.
What?
And among like 15 others, like Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed were in there. And then like me and No Man's Sky and Everybody's Going to the Rapture. And their award is meant for, they're assuming that you're from a gigantic studio with tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. And so they gave me like a bag, and they said, this is for your team, so that your team can wear these buttons. And I'm like, I'm just one guy. Like, I can make a suit of chainmail out of all of these buttons.
I hope
are you sure you really want to do this?
That would be awesome. Secret after you've beat Axiom Verge, New Game Plus maybe. I'd love to find the button chainmail suit to protect you in. That'd be an awesome Easter egg. And is there anyone else working on the game with you? Working on the music at least, or some of the other things that are a little bit more further distance from the central design?
No, it's just me. I do the music too.
Wow.
But I mean, I have to give heavy props to Sony for like just they basically are my marketing. I have no marketing budget or ability to really market aside from social networking.
Sure.
So that is a significant hand that they had to play. Nick Sutton,
Absolutely.
Ryan Silva, Shane Bettenhausen, all those folks.
Yeah, Shane. Shane and I go back. He was when I first met him, not as far back as I'd like. I followed him on his various video game journalist jobs before I met him. He was working on El Shaddai. I don't know if you ever played that game.
I didn't, but I wanted to.
It's not too late.
That was
I
the
highly
really
recommend it.
trippy, almost like God of War type of game, right?
Kind
Or
of.
like-
It
yeah.
was. It looked like God of War, unfortunately, from the surface, but it was much more simple than that. It was by the art director of Okami, but he was the director of every aspect of the game, the action, the story. Took a little-known excerpt from the Old Testament, where Lucifer is actually kind of a nice guy who's got an umbrella, and he urges on a dead person to come back to life to stop a group of angels that have been making out with people and making angel-human baby hybrids. So Shane worked on that game. He's a little bit game
wow.
developer in there too, and he believed in it even though it had absolutely no surface level marketability. It had no proven track record of oh yeah, cell shaded Bible games. That's what's hot right now. But he gave it everything he had, and I was so happy that Sony picked him up to help with marketing games like yours, because he totally gets what's good about these things that people may not know that they're already going to like. But back to you and E3. So here you are in marketing heaven or marketing hell, depending on how you look at it. Did you see how marketing works and how when somebody thinks that other people think something is good, that makes them curious and then makes them more predisposed to like and accept it? Did you see how that snowball can work where because people are talking about Axiom Verge, it's so hot right now, all of a sudden everyone thinks they're supposed to be talking about it, and there they are actually giving it a chance. Did you see that happen?
I see it, and I've even had journalists tell me oh, I just go for the game where I see a crowd of people standing there. It's probably because it's good. The rest of the crowd is there probably because they saw someone else and thought, oh, that guy knows that it's good. Yeah, I think I think it's kind of in a way, they might be trying to pick who's going to win. They want to be the one who picks them out. So I don't actually know if my game is so great that it's better than Destiny, the most expensive game ever made. So much as we're in this time when I think they're kind of trying to find the person who's going to be the next it or whatever.
Sure, they're looking for the next that game company or the next Notch or the next Team Ico. They definitely are, but it's so awesome to me that people in your position finally get to profit from that, because marketing is I don't know if you follow The Walking Dead. It's pretty cool.
I read the comic for a while, and
I don't know if you saw the Walking Dead herd dynamic, the herd theory, where one zombie starts walking in a direction, and another zombie sees it walking and thinks, oh, I'll follow him, maybe there's something good. And then there's two zombies walking somewhere, so then two zombies would see those and be like, oh, that looks good if they're going together. And before you know it, they've amassed hundreds of thousands of zombies, all head in the same direction. Well, those zombies used to always only go where AAA marketing was saying there was food to eat. But now they're going towards you, potentially. Now the marketing thing is finally turned around, and they thought, let's find someone who's doing something genuine and interesting and decide that's what we're going to put up on the pedestal. And I didn't mean to say all video game consumers are zombies, because I'm certainly one of them. But that's the way marketing mentality works. You hear a movie is #1 in America, I know I'm more likely to see it, because I think, well, if all those other people liked it, it must be good. It's less risky that way with your money. Video games certainly aren't cheap these days. So you're finally on the upswing of the zombie herd.
Yeah, they're heading for me. What can I say?
Pretty
I'm the
exciting.
choice zombie food.
Yeah.
Or
Hopefully I will too.
Yeah, at least for GameSpot, I guess.
Yeah. Well, they are one of the largest voices in this thing. I guess the next step would be to see if PewDiePie will play your thing. That always helps people. Game Grumps, I bet, would love your game. It's got a lot of those classic 18-bit, 16-bit fundamentals that Egoraptor in particular finds really fascinating. So for marketing, all you got to do, from what I can tell, is get the biggest voices to make noise about you, and it trickles down from there. Eventually you blow up, and that's what you're doing. So good on you. This is exciting, Tom. I'm excited for you. I like life sometimes. Sometimes life is good. We only have 10 minutes left of show, and I haven't asked any questions yet. Let's see if any questions. None in from Sinistar. And I will ask on Twitter, because Twitter is a friend that has just changed everything. You can just ask. I have 11,000 or so Twitter followers. Not all of them are on there, but probably 100 people right now will read the tweet I am typing. Sub Holmes questions for Tom Verge? How'd you come up with the name Axiom Verge?
Ostensibly, Axiom is like a postulate or a rule, and Axiom Verge is about first finding those rules and then breaking them.
Huh.
But it's also partially a random name that I pulled out of my butt. I actually just took a lot of words I liked and tried mixing and mashing different words together until one seemed to fit, or at least I got tired of doing it and just gave up. So, yeah.
Huh, interesting. So by naming your game in that way, you were kind of breaking the rules of naming things at the same time.
Yeah, I think the first thing that happened was there was like a NeoGAF thread about how terrible the name was back when I made the first trailer in like 2012.
Huh. It's funny. You're dealing, as you get more and more high profile, you're dealing with the immediate critics, people who enjoy criticism as just a pastime. Like, how can I say something bad about something? I know. I'll say the name is bad immediately. We have a couple of questions coming in. First is Ed, who is Eduardo Licious. It's more of a comment. Eduardo Licious says, I've somehow not heard much of this game, but hot damn, do I need it right friggin' now. Holy shit. So thanks, Ed Licious. I guess you've done a good job marketing your game. Good job. Good job, Tom. Yeah, you did it.
Oh, actually, I can't tell where the edge of the screen is here.
Liam Carl asks, what computer did you first use for coding? Do you remember going back?
Oh, back in the day? I think it was a 486 DX2 50 megahertz, and I think it had 4 megs of RAM, maybe.
Oh, amazing. Do you remember what your very first game was back in the day?
So I made a lot of games that I never finished, and the first one I did, I wanted to make something like Final Fantasy, because that was Final Fantasy VI was my favorite game at the time, and Final Fantasy VII. So I kind of got a not quite so legal copy of 3DS Max and made a probably atrocious by modern day standards town that kind of resembled Nibelheim, and I had 4 character sprites walking around on it, and then I stopped. I don't remember why I stopped. I think it was just so hard to like do that much that I was just like, okay, I'm done.
How long do you think it took you to make that walking around an overworld game?
I think it was several months anyway. I remember working on it all summer. I was taking a class over the summer in object-oriented programming and working on that when I got home from school each day, and I probably stopped working on it like when the next semester started in the fall.
Sure, in reality, must have caught up. Do you think there's something about you that makes these kinds of things fun for you? That, I mean, you talked a little bit how you, quite wisely, I think, take the attitude that this isn't like work, this is fun. If I approach something as play, then I can enjoy it. Where I approach it as a responsibility or a chore, then you can't help but think of it as something you don't want to do. But still, a lot of people want to approach creating a video game as play, as fun, but then they just can't keep it up. They can't hack it. But something about you has caused you to be able to keep up with it. Do you think there's something about it that clicks with you in a way that makes it so it stays fun for you even when it gets hard?
It might just be my personality, you know, like a lot of people in our industry. I'm kind of like the introverted, shy nerd. When I was a kid, it was all about Legos. Like when I think about like how did I get into programming, a lot of it goes back to Legos. It's so Lego-like, and people said like, yeah, like when you were a kid, Tommy, you used to play with Legos. You could play for hours on end and never be tired. And I think it might be that, like I am the type that, you know, has a lot of patience. I know that the thing that I just started working on that's only 2 blocks big is going to look beautiful, like if I keep on working on it and it's you know, a giant space station or something at the end, and that might have been like an early life lesson.
It's so interesting that for some, I'm still trying to figure this out. Human psychology. Boy, it's interesting. For some people, they take that attitude towards exercise. And they're like, all right, if I just, you know, only eat protein bars and salads and work out every day, then I'll have built the most amazing body ever in a year. And if you say that to me, I'll just be like, no, don't want to do it. But if you say, you know, if you keep doing your talk show with video game developers, you know, who knows, maybe in 10 years, people will actually think it's just as good to listen to video game developers talk as it is to marketing guys talk. I'll be like, sure, I'll try it. I'll put 10 years into my life for that. So the fact that you want to build games, you'll build music too. You'll build something out of blocks. But you may not necessarily get the same excitement out of, like, building a physical house or building up your physical body.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you do something that's fun for whatever you are. You know, if you are the kind of person that likes, you know, building with wood and hammer and nails, I would say do that. You know, don't like try to be a programmer or something, because it's going to be all hands off, virtual. You know, there's nothing physical out of it. Do the thing that you think is sustainable for you to do for a long time. You will enjoy doing.
Absolutely. People sometimes put the cart before the horse and think, oh, well, the way to win at life is to follow in the footsteps of other people that seem to be happy because they're successful video game developers or successful actors or whatever, and they've got fame and they've got money, but it's not so much that they've achieved those goals. It's not that they got to the end of the level and won. It's that they enjoyed the process of getting there. So whatever process you enjoy is the way you're going to find happiness. So one of the themes of our conversation today, I think, you've pointed out quite a few times in one way or another, that getting to the level where you've gained all the power-ups and have all the money and are Reggie Fils-Aimé, that doesn't mean you're necessarily happy, because your job at that point is to manage other people who are getting to be creative. And you have to just like sit in fear looking at this kingdom that you have and wonder how are you going to best utilize all these assets to not make the stockholders unhappy. That's not a fun video game. I wouldn't play Reggie Fils-Aimé the video game. I might play Tom You the video game a little bit more. Do we have any more questions? I think we're just about out of questions, just about out of time. Sinistar said the mic was cutting out. Was my mic cutting out, Tom?
Just when you typed, I think it might have been doing the thing where it was trying to cut out.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Beware bad short-term memory.
Sinistar razzes me every once in a while, and he is sinister and terrifying, so as is. I'm sorry about that, guys. Didn't mean to cut out while I was typing. Hopefully all of my other long-winded rants that were so great didn't cut out during that for you.
Can I show you my dog?
Oh, yeah, show me everything you got.
Can you see my dog?
I can see your dog. Oh, what a good-looking, honest, well-meaning dog that is. Little white mustache. What's your dog's name?
Max. Max
Awesome.
the dog. Yeah,
Max the dog.
I call him my producer. He produces stinks, and I smell them.
Adorable. So you can be found on Twitter on Axiom Verge. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's just Axiom Verge. As simple as it can be.
Gotcha. And do you have a .com and everything?
Yeah, there's an axiomverge.com and a Facebook /Axiom Verge and a YouTube /Axiom Verge and
Yes.
probably some
all
other
on
things.
there. And PlayStation blog. PlayStation Network or PlayStation blog? I can't remember. Blog.us PlayStation, I think it is. Does pretty frequent updates about what you're doing. That's where I first find out about the PS4 and the PS Vita, and it's still coming to PC or Steam as well.
Yeah, there's a 3-month exclusivity. So if I reach my target of releasing in February for PlayStation, then it should be around May or June that the PC version comes out.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, that's very exciting. Tom Happ, how fun it was to talk to you. I did pronounce your name right? I don't know why I'm scared that it's like Hepapa. I don't know. I've got nervousness. Please don't skip my question. Oh, one guy wanted one other question. Hunter Trammell, who is at Soda Pop Moss, asks, pizza and coffee or Pepsi and coloring pencils? Does that mean anything to you?
It's got to be a reference to some like cult favorite movie.
Could be.
I haven't seen it. I'm so sorry to disappoint you.
That is interesting.
But you know, pizza and coffee does sound like pretty good right now. Yeah.
Depends on the pizza. Depends on the coffee, but sure.
Exactly. It's got to be New York pizza.
Yeah, and Seattle coffee. All right, that's it for me. I'm at Tronauts on Twitter. This show can be found on the YouTube channel, supholmes.com/suphomeshow. I'm sorry, youtube.com/suphomeshow is where you can find all the reruns. We're working on a .net. It's going to be supholmes.net. It's not quite done yet, but you can catch all the reruns there. And we'll see. I'm also over on Destructoid.com. Maybe posting some of these reruns up there. Still in talks about that. So fun can be had, everyone. Thanks so much, Tom. It was great meeting you.
Oh, thanks. You too.